So for our research presentation, we chose to do patriotism during World War II. Now, we chose this topic to understand the effects of World War II and the patriotism that prevailed from it. What we want to know is, how did World War II shape patriotism in America? And here's how we found some sources to address this question. For a popular source, we looked up our general topic on Ham Library through Rochester and searched for the best available article that relates to our question. For our academic source, we also used the Ham Library under JSTOR, but searched for a publication that was labeled as peer-reviewed. As for our popular source, we chose a publication from David Kennedy titled, "What is Patriotism Without Sacrifice?" David Kennedy has several publications out about the topic of history and war from multiple sources, and this source is also from the New York Times, so we believe this is a credible source. Overall, the source discusses what Americans went through to help play their role in the war and what sacrifices they made and how they made them. To sustain the martial spirit and sanctify the dead, Americans safe at home nonetheless needed to feel they too were making sacrifices in the pursuit of victory. This is a quote from David Kennedy. This addresses our question because Americans felt as though they needed to support in any way as a tribute to victory and a strong country. A few quotes we have from this publication. President Roosevelt announced a 7-point program for economic mobilization. This included bond sales, heavier taxation, controls on wages, prices and credit, and the rationing of all essential commodities, which are scarce. For the most part, Americans did not chafe under the restrictions. Many cheerfully gave up tinned foods and held their way to more healthful diets by raising fresh fruits and vegetables in victory gardens. Now, we believe this proves overall how Americans contributed to the war. The government enforced war bonds that paid for the war and pushed a rationing agenda to save supplies, and this was very impactful. We could not have won the war if it wasn't for our civilians' help. As for our academic source, we chose The Politics of Sacrifice on the American Homefront in World War II. This is written by Mark Leff. Mark Leff studied U.S. history, politics, and policy. Leff he received a BA in economics at Brown as well as a PhD at the University of Chicago. We believe this source is credible because the Journal of American History is the leading scholarly publication and journal of record in the field of American history. Overall, this source is a major resource for the study, investigation, and teaching of our country's heritage. A few quotes from Leff. During World War II, Americans gloried in the feeling that they were participating in a noble and successful cause by making sacrifices. The consecration of sacrifice inspired declarations of willingness to shoulder new burdens. This explains how the sacrifice of those who have fought in the war has inspired others to overcome challenges on their own with a feeling of patriotism. This was an inspiring time for Americans when they saw their own men step up to fight for their country. So, overall, what we learned, by reviewing both our popular and academic sources, we now understand the steps the government made to help support the war. We also learned how some Americans had different views of sacrifice and what this term meant to certain individuals. Now, how are these sources similar? Both of these sources mention the sacrifices Americans had to make for the success of World War II. And these sources are different in the way that our academic source gives a deeper insight to what sacrifice really meant at this time of war. Although our popular source also goes into some explanation of this, it also details the role that President Roosevelt had at this time and the agenda he pushed toward the American people. Now, some further questions we had about this topic. Were more people in support of the war rather than not? And did the majority contribute to the war considering the rationing agenda and the propaganda?